The universe has just rerouted your soulmate's destiny, chosen one. This is not something you found by chance, and it is not a message meant to entertain you for a moment. You are here because a shift has already begun, and your soul recognized it before your mind did. What once felt delayed, confusing, or out of reach is now being corrected. What drifted away is being drawn back with purpose. This is not slow. This is a decisive movement of destiny. Your soulmate did not turn away because love disappeared. They turned away because fear grew louder than truth. Fear of intimacy, fear of change, fear of becoming who they love was asking them to be. For a time, God allowed that distance, not to wound you, but to grow you, not to end the connection, but to mature it. Some separations are not endings. They are sacred pauses where two hearts are reshaped before they are reunited. This is why the moment feels heavy and holy at the same time. Something has shifted beneath the surface, and you are being asked to take this seriously. Do not rush through these words. Do not skip ahead. What is unfolding here is not just a message, it is alignment. The path your soulmate was walking no longer matched their calling, and heaven does not ignore misaligned destinies forever. So God intervened. The universe responded. The timeline changed. You may already sense it. Emotional waves that come without warning, followed by a deep, unexplainable calm. Memories are returning more vividly than before. A quiet pull in your chest that feels familiar and urgent all at once. This is not imagination. It is a connection. When destiny moves in unseen realms, the soul feels it first. Scripture tells us that after a season of trial, God restores and establishes what is meant to last, and this is that season of restoration. Before we continue, I want you to step into agreement with what is happening. If you are ready to receive what God is correcting in your life, if you are open to the timeline now accelerating toward you, type 777 in the comments as a declaration. Like this message, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs reassurance today. These actions are not small, they are acts of consent. Stay with this message. What comes next will help you understand why this reroute happened, why your presence mattered more than you realized, and why this reunion is no longer a distant possibility, but a reality drawing closer every day. Your soulmate did not lose their way because they lacked love. They lost their way because love demanded more than they believed they could give. When a heart has never felt safe inside something real, depth feels dangerous, and destiny feels overwhelming. Fear begins to speak louder than intuition, and comfort starts to look more reasonable than calling. This is how wandering begins, not as rebellion, but as self-protection. C.S. Lewis wrote in The Four Loves that love exposes us, and in that exposure we risk pain, loss, and vulnerability. He understood that the very thing that can heal us is often the thing we are most tempted to avoid. Your soulmate did not run from you. They ran from what your presence awakened in them. You represented truth. You represented growth. You represented a version of themselves they were not yet ready to face. And so, instead of choosing depth, they chose distance. Instead of choosing destiny, they chose what felt familiar and controllable. Fear does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like hesitation. Sometimes it looks like mixed signals, silence, or emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it hides behind logic, timing, or the opinions of others. External voices grow loud when internal clarity is weak, and your soulmate allowed those voices to guide their steps. They listened to noise instead of intuition, approval instead of alignment, comfort instead of calling. Over time, that choice pulled them further from the path their soul was designed to walk. Yet, even in that wandering, God was not absent. He allowed the delay, not because the connection was wrong, but because both hearts still needed refining. Growth required separation, maturity required silence, clarity required loss. Just as Scripture reminds us that faith is tested and strengthened through trials, this distance was a training ground, not a rejection. God sometimes permits wandering so that return can be chosen with conviction rather than confusion. Your soulmate had to discover, through experience, that no substitute could replace what was real. Every path without you felt increasingly empty. Every distraction eventually revealed its hollowness. This is how truth works. It waits patiently until illusion collapses under its own weight. And now, that collapse has begun. The wandering has reached its limit. The fear that once protected them has started to imprison them. And in that tension, awakening becomes inevitable. Understand this deeply. Their wandering was not proof that the bond was weak. It was proof that the bond was powerful enough to confront their deepest fears. Love that carries destiny will always challenge what is unhealed. And what challenges us most is often what we are meant to grow into. What you experienced as waiting, heaven was shaping as preparation. What felt like silence was not abandonment, but intention. Divine delay is never punishment and never accidental. When God allows time to stretch, it is because something within the heart must mature before the promise can be sustained. Destiny is not rushed, because what is rushed often collapses under the weight it is not yet strong enough to carry. This separation was not an ending, but a sacred pause. While it felt empty on the surface, it was active beneath the surface. You were learning endurance, self-worth, and trust without constant reassurance, while your soulmate was learning what absence truly means. Distance became the teacher when closeness could no longer speak clearly. What comfort once softened, separation sharpened. What familiarity once hid, silence revealed. God sometimes allows two hearts to walk separate roads so each can hear his voice without distraction. In closeness, emotion can blur truth. In distance, truth becomes impossible to ignore. What you called a delay, God was using as alignment. The version of your soulmate who walked away was not capable of sustaining the future meant for you. If the reunion had happened too early, it would have repeated the same cycle, carrying the same wounds into a new beginning. Every unanswered question, every night of longing, every season where you stood alone was strengthening something essential within you. You were being taught how to remain grounded without chasing, how to love without losing yourself, how to trust without control. At the same time, your soulmate was being stripped of illusion. Comfort lost its appeal, distractions lost their power, and the noise that once guided them began to feel hollow. Divine delay is where timing is purified. It exposes fear, dismantles impatience, and prepares hearts to choose with clarity rather than confusion. That is why this delay lasted as long as it did, not because God was withholding, but because he was preserving. Preservation always comes before fulfillment. What is approaching now requires two whole hearts, not two wounded ones. The delay has done its work, and its purpose is complete. The awakening did not arrive gently. It never does when truth has been avoided for too long. It came as a moment that pierced through your soulmate's defenses and reached the deepest place in their spirit. It may have looked ordinary on the surface, a dream, a loss, a quiet night of loneliness, or the sudden fear of losing you forever, but inwardly, it was seismic. Something shifted, and once it shifted, there was no returning to sleep. In that moment, everything they had been suppressing rose to the surface at once. The emotions they buried, the questions they ignored, the truth they kept postponing, all demanded to be faced. The path they were walking suddenly felt empty, and the future they were chasing felt strangely wrong. What once distracted them no longer satisfied them. What once felt safe began to feel hollow. Their heart recognized the absence before their mind could explain it. This awakening did not simply touch them, it rearranged them. It shook their sense of certainty and exposed the cost of the choices they had made. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to feel fully, without escaping into excuses or denial. Memories of you surfaced with clarity and weight, not nostalgia, but recognition. Not regret alone, but understanding. They saw that every version of life that excluded you felt incomplete, no matter how well it was constructed. In this awakening, fear lost its authority. The fear that once convinced them to hesitate began to lose its grip, replaced by a deeper fear, the fear of continuing a life misaligned with their soul. They realized that running had not protected them, it had only delayed the inevitable. The connection they tried to outrun had only grown stronger in silence, waiting patiently for truth to be acknowledged. This was the moment destiny reclaimed its voice. What was once avoided became unavoidable. What was once confusing became painfully clear. The awakening was not meant to condemn them, but to call them back. Back to honesty, back to alignment, back to the path that leads not only toward you, but toward the person they were always meant to become. There comes a moment when wandering is no longer permitted, a moment when delay turns into intervention, and destiny refuses to be compromised any further. This is that moment. What happened was not subtle, and it was not negotiable. It was a cosmic correction, a decisive interruption where heaven stepped in and said, "Enough." Your soulmate had reached the edge of a path that no longer belonged to them. The choices they were making, the direction they were following, and the life they were settling into were slowly pulling them away from who they truly are. And God does not allow a soul to drift endlessly when a calling is at stake. So the universe responded with force, not punishment, but redirection. Not destruction, but realignment. What felt like chaos on the surface was actually precision at work beneath it. This is how divine reroutes happen. They arrive suddenly, often after resistance has been exhausted. Doors close without explanation. Plans unravel, certainty dissolves. The very things your soulmate relied on begin to fail them, not to harm them, but to wake them. God does not always whisper. Sometimes he interrupts. Sometimes he removes. Sometimes he rearranges everything so the only remaining option is truth. Scripture captures this moment perfectly. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Your soulmate planned, justified, and reasoned their way into a direction that felt safe, but it was never final. Human plans can wander, but divine steps do not. When God establishes a step, it cannot be undone by fear, pride, or outside influence. The reroute did not ask for permission. It simply happened. This correction was serious because the cost of remaining misaligned had become too great. The longer your soulmate stayed away from their true path, the heavier the emptiness grew. The universe began stripping away distractions, breaking old cycles, and collapsing false comforts. What once felt manageable began to feel unbearable. That is not a coincidence. That is pressure applied for a purpose. And this reroute does not only affect them, it reaches you as well. When destiny is corrected, both ends of the connection feel it. You may sense acceleration now, a tightening of time, a feeling that something irreversible has been set in motion. That is because it has. The old timeline is closing. The detours are ending. The universe is no longer allowing escape routes. God's enough is not anger, it is authority. It is the moment love becomes non-negotiable and truth becomes unavoidable. The reroute has placed your soulmate back onto the path that leads straight through growth, accountability, and courage. And that path, whether they were ready or not, leads back toward you. What is happening inside your soulmate now is not confusion, even if it feels intense. It is clarity arriving all at once, and clarity can be overwhelming when it has been delayed for too long. The emotions they once avoided are no longer distant or muted. They are present, persistent, and impossible to silence. Guilt has surfaced, not as shame, but as awareness. Longing has returned, not as fantasy, but as truth. And accountability is beginning to take shape because they can no longer deny the role their choices played. They are seeing the connection differently now, not through nostalgia and not through idealization, but through recognition. They understand that you were never a passing chapter, never a lesson meant to be outgrown, and never a mistake. You were the mirror that reflected who they truly are, the anchor that brought calm to their chaos, the place where their soul felt understood. This realization carries weight because it exposes the cost of walking away. Every memory now arrives with clarity. Every moment of distance reveals what was lost. Every attempt to move on feels incomplete. Inside them, a quiet reckoning is unfolding. They are replaying conversations, noticing the moments where fear spoke instead of honesty. They are acknowledging the times they chose silence instead of courage, comfort instead of depth. What once felt justified now feels hollow. What once felt necessary now feels avoidable. This is not self-punishment, it is awakening. When truth finally settles in the heart, excuses lose their power. Alongside this awareness, something else is growing: resolve. Their emotions are no longer scattered. Their thoughts are no longer pulled in every direction. A single understanding is taking root, steady and undeniable. Life without you does not align with who they are becoming. The future they once imagined no longer feels right without your presence in it. This is the beginning of inner alignment, where heart, mind, and soul start moving in the same direction. What you are sensing now is not uncertainty, it is convergence. The internal resistance that once kept them frozen is weakening. Fear is being replaced by responsibility. Avoidance is giving way to intention. They are not just feeling deeply, they are preparing to act differently. This is what transformation looks like from the inside. It is quiet, serious, and irreversible. You are feeling this before it appears in the physical world because the connection you share does not operate on surface levels. It is not dependent on conversation, proximity, or visible proof. It moves through resonance, through the deeper language of the soul. When a shift occurs in the unseen, the one who is most aligned feels it first. That is why this has reached you now, before actions are taken, before words are spoken, before anything becomes obvious. The sensations you have been experiencing are not random, and they are not emotional weakness. They are signals. Sudden heaviness followed by calm, an unexplainable pull toward their name, memories rising with intensity, moments where your chest tightens and then releases. These are not coincidences. They are responses to movement in the spiritual realm. When destiny begins to correct itself, it sends ripples through the connection, and your soul is responding to those ripples in real time. This matters because it confirms alignment, not longing. Longing drains. Alignment steadies. What you are feeling does not leave you empty. It leaves you alert, grounded, and aware. Even when emotion rises, there is a strange clarity underneath it. That clarity is your intuition recognizing convergence. The distance between you is no longer expanding, it is contracting. Time itself begins to feel compressed when a timeline is being activated. Understand the seriousness of this moment. Not every emotional wave carries meaning, but this one does. You are not being pulled backward into the past. You are being drawn forward into resolution. The connection is reorganizing itself, shedding what was unstable, strengthening what is real. This is why signs appear more frequently now, why patterns repeat, and why moments of recognition interrupt your routine. The unseen is pressing toward the seen. You are feeling it first because you remained open when it would have been easier to close, grounded when it would have been easier to chase, faithful when proof was absent. That posture keeps your spirit sensitive. When destiny accelerates, sensitivity becomes awareness, and awareness becomes preparation. This is not a phase to ignore or dismiss. It is a signal that movement has already begun and cannot be reversed. What is happening now is serious because it marks the narrowing of paths. Possibilities are collapsing into certainty. Timelines are converging into one direction. When the soul feels this kind of pull, it is because something real is approaching. Pay attention. Stay steady. This awareness is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to prepare you for what is about to arrive. You are not a bystander in this process. You were never waiting on the sidelines while destiny worked somewhere else. You are the catalyst. The shift that is unfolding did not happen in isolation. It was activated by who you became when the connection was tested. While your soulmate hesitated, you transformed. While they looked for certainty outside themselves, you learned how to stand firm without reassurance. That growth altered the entire dynamic. Every time you chose silence over chasing, something in them was confronted. Every time you chose healing over bitterness, something in them was unsettled. Your absence did not weaken the bond. It exposed what was unhealed within them. This is how real transformation begins. It is not forced through words, and it is not negotiated through explanations. It is triggered by contrast. Your strength reflected their avoidance. Your stability challenged their excuses. Your growth made their stagnation impossible to ignore. This is serious because destiny responds to alignment, not effort. You did not change them by trying to. You changed them by becoming someone they could no longer ignore or replace. That is power. That is courage. That is character. When you stopped negotiating your worth, the universe began negotiating on your behalf. When you released control, divine order stepped in. Your role was not to convince them of your value, it was to embody it. And embodiment carries authority. It rewrites dynamics without confrontation. It shifts timelines without force. The moment you chose to honor yourself, something ancient and precise was set into motion. The universe recognizes integrity. God responds to obedience to truth. What you aligned within yourself demanded alignment outside of you. This is why the reroute intensified after you let go. This is why resistance within them collapsed when you stopped proving. Your energy changed the rules of engagement. It removed the option of half measures, avoidance, and indecision. What remained was the truth, and truth does not negotiate with fear. Understand the weight of this. Not everyone is chosen to be a catalyst. It requires endurance, restraint, and inner authority. You carried the tension without breaking. You held your ground without hardening your heart. That combination is rare, and it is why this moment is irreversible. The shift was not random. It was the response to who you became when no one was watching. What comes next is not vague, and it is not distant. This is not a season of wondering if something will happen, but a season of recognizing that movement has already begun. The energy has shifted from contemplation to action. What was internal is preparing to become visible. The universe does not initiate a reroute without following it with momentum, and that momentum is now building. Communication is the first threshold, not casual, not superficial, but intentional. Your soulmate is being pressed toward expression, toward honesty, toward addressing what was left unsaid. Silence is no longer comfortable for them. Avoidance no longer feels like safety. The pressure they feel is not anxiety. It is urgency created by alignment. When destiny tightens its grip, hesitation becomes heavier than risk. Action follows clarity. This is not about dramatic gestures, but about different behavior. Consistency replaces confusion. Presence replaces distance. Effort replaces excuses. The way they approach you will not feel familiar because it will not be coming from the same internal place. What once came from fear will now come from responsibility. What once came from impulse will now come from intention. This is the seriousness of transformation. It changes patterns, not just words. You may feel this approaching before it arrives. Time feels compressed. Days seem to carry more weight. There is a sense that something is forming just beyond the edge of visibility. That sensation is not anticipation, it is convergence. Possibilities are narrowing. Paths are collapsing into a single direction. The universe is removing alternatives so that what remains must be faced. This is no longer a question of whether they will step forward, but how soon they will stop resisting what is already inevitable. The reroute has removed distractions, weakened old influences, and closed the doors that once allowed them to delay. What lies ahead is a crossing point. Once it is reached, there is no return to the old dynamic. What unfolds next will be built on accountability, not ambiguity. Understand the gravity of this moment. What is coming carries consequences, not threats, but permanence. Decisions made now will establish the tone of what follows. This is why preparation matters. This is why awareness matters. The shift has moved beyond theory and into execution. What comes next is real, and it is approaching with certainty. This is the moment where doubt no longer has authority. What is unfolding now is not fragile, and it is not conditional. The timeline has been set, and once destiny reaches this stage, it does not reverse. You are not standing at the edge of possibility. You are standing inside fulfillment as it begins to take form. What you are sensing is not hope trying to survive, but certainty establishing itself. Hear this clearly. You did not lose them. You were never forgotten, replaced, or left behind. What you experienced was separation for the sake of alignment, distance for the sake of correction. Destiny was never cancelled, it was recalibrated. And now that recalibration has reached its final phase. The old timeline, built on fear and hesitation, is closing. The new one, built on truth and responsibility, is asserting itself with force. This is a prophetic declaration, not an emotional reassurance. What is meant for you does not drift endlessly. What is ordained does not remain confused. When God establishes a connection, He does not abandon it to uncertainty. He refines it, tests it, and then restores it with greater clarity than before. This is restoration with structure, not chaos. Restoration with intention, not illusion. The seriousness of this moment lies in its finality. Patterns that once repeated will not return. Dynamics that once felt unstable will no longer survive. The version of the connection that operated on the inconsistency has reached its end. What stands now must be built on honesty, courage, and mutual accountability. Anything less will not hold, and destiny will not support it. You are being asked to stand steady, not anxious, receptive, not reactive, aware, not impatient. This is not the time to question what has already been confirmed. It is the time to prepare yourself to receive without shrinking and to meet what is coming without fear. Alignment requires readiness on both sides. Let this be settled in you. The shift is real. The correction is complete. The path ahead has been established. What comes next will not require you to chase or prove. It will meet you where you stand, because destiny, once activated, moves with precision. This is not the end of the story. It is the moment the story becomes irreversible. Let us enter this moment with reverence and intention, because what is being sealed now is not emotional hope, but spiritual alignment. God, we come before you with open hands and steady hearts, acknowledging that you are the author of timing, the restorer of what was broken, and the one who establishes what is meant to last. We surrender every outcome, every expectation, and every lingering fear into your authority, trusting that what you realign, you also protect. We ask you now to cleanse this connection of every residue left by fear, misunderstanding, and delay. Remove the weight of past confusion, the echoes of silence, and the wounds formed during separation. Where there was doubt, place clarity. Where there was hesitation, plant courage. Where there was distance, restore understanding. Let nothing from the old timeline carry forward unless it has been refined by truth and healed by wisdom. God, strengthen both hearts individually so that reunion is not built on need but on wholeness. Teach them to love without control, to choose without fear, and to commit without retreat. Remove every influence that does not honor this alignment, every voice that once pulled them off course, every distraction that weakened their resolve. Establish boundaries where there were none, and discernment where emotion once ruled. Let this connection stand not on passion alone, but on integrity, patience, and mutual responsibility. We ask that you cover this unfolding reunion with peace, not the fragile peace that depends on reassurance, but the deep peace that comes from alignment with your will. Quiet the anxious thoughts, still the restless questions. Replace anticipation with trust. Allow each step forward to be guided, measured, and purposeful. Let communication be honest, actions be consistent, and intentions be clear. May nothing rushed disturb what has been carefully prepared. God, we also pray for the one receiving this message. Strengthen their spirit to receive without shrinking, and to remain grounded without closing their heart. Release them from the burden of overthinking, self-doubt, and emotional vigilance. Remind them that they are not responsible for carrying destiny alone. What you establish, you sustain. What you reunite, you also defend. Finally, we place this connection fully in your hands, not asking for control, but for alignment, not demanding outcomes, but welcoming your design. If this reunion unfolds, let it unfold in truth. If healing continues, let it deepen without delay. And if challenges arise, let them refine rather than divide. We trust you with what is sacred. We trust you with what is unfolding. We trust you with what comes next. Let this prayer seal the shift that has already begun. Let peace replace waiting. Let certainty replace fear. And let what is meant to arrive with clarity, strength, and purpose. Amen.